I was a prison guard, and after our warden's daughter was called inside our prison, he began interrogating prisoners for answers. So I tried to intervene, but he blackmailed me, threatened my family, and turned my community against me. So I played his own game and pulled an Uno reverse that devastated his entire life. I used to work as a prison guard, and one day our warden decided it would be a good idea to bring his 10-year-old daughter in so she could see where Dad works. He left her alone in his office for just a minute when she wandered out. He found her 10 minutes later in one of the corridors, bleeding out from her head with the fly on her pants undone. Watching him clutch her against his chest and hold her lifeless body repeating, "Daddy's got you, sweetheart," for hours was a sight I'll never forget. From that moment on, he became obsessed with finding out who did this. He didn't even take a day off from work, just came in next morning off no sleep and spent the whole day grilling every prisoner and guard. He offered bribes, reduced sentences, special privileges, anything for information. I remember watching him break down between interviews, then slam his head into the wall repeatedly, just so the physical pain could momentarily drown out the emotional one for long enough to conduct the next interview. He rounded everybody he thought gave suspicious answers and threatened them with solitary confinement, beatings, firings for guards. He even went as far as forcing a prisoner to wear a wire during yard to hopefully catch an admission, threatening that prisoner with an extra 2 years to his sentence if he didn't wear it. Unfortunately, his interviews didn't get him an answer, so he started becoming more harsh. 2.5 weeks after the death, he came into work hammered and grabbed me by the shoulders, telling me today was the beginning of the end. He then rounded up all the prisoners and announced to them that until the truth about who did it comes out, they would only be getting fed every second day. The backlash was brutal, and the warden took that as a sign that the people protesting were guilty. He got a hold of everyone who stepped out of line and ordered us, the guards, to hit them. Some guards, including myself, felt bad and didn't want to, but he threatened our jobs, saying if we're hesitating, then that means one of us must have culled his daughter. He'd pace around the prison either high or hammered every day, banging on random cells to tearfully beg for someone to tell him who took his daughter. When that didn't work, he began threatening the prisoners' children. He'd call up the prisoners he found most suspicious into his office and vividly describe to them the connections he had outside and what he could do to their families if they didn't confess. Unsurprisingly, this led to the prisoners hating him, with one particular inmate even lunging at the warden in the office. Said inmate ended up getting stabbed in the arm and had 5 years added to his sentence. But that wasn't even the worst part. You see, the warden took this inmate's rebellion as a clear admission that he was the guilty one, and because of that, the inmate, Jeremiah, was brought back to the warden's office a few days later. Nobody saw Jeremiah again for the following days after, so we all assumed he was just thrown in solitary or something. But then one day, while going to get coffee, I heard screaming coming from the underground tunnels below. I went down to investigate, and the more I followed the sound, the more disturbing it got, like nothing I'd ever even envisioned before. I remember going to the door where the sound was coming from, and through the crack, I could see it. The warden had Jeremiah tied to a chair. He was doing horror movie level things to him and screaming at Jeremiah to admit he did it. He had a table of tools next to him, with everything from pliers to knives to blowtorches and even a buzzsaw. It was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen. Jeremiah already had 2 less fingers and marks up and down his body. I froze, but before my conscious mind could make a decision, I started banging on the door. I saw the warden freeze. He slowly came up to the door, looking disheveled and manic. He looked like he was on everything that's hardcore at once, hasn't slept in weeks, and his eyes were that of a psychopath. I yelled, asking him what the hell he's doing, and he screamed back that Jeremiah deserves to pay. I retorted that he had no idea if Jeremiah even did it, and that's when he went silent. I heard footsteps, then saw him going back to Jeremiah, where he started pouring salt into his open wounds, screaming at him to confess. I pounded harder on the already damaged door, my fist aching as the old lock rattled but held firm. The warden's voice rose above Jeremiah's agonized shrieks, screaming, "Confess," over and over. The sound of liquid splashing, followed by an inhuman wail, told me he was pouring more salt into the wounds. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. I heard footsteps approaching the door, slow and deliberate. The warden's breathing came heavy through the crack, and when he spoke, his voice was low and controlled through gritted teeth. "How long have you been standing there?" My mouth went dry. I tried to lie, stammering that I'd just arrived, just heard something strange, but he cut me off with a harsh laugh. "You called me a psychopath 5 minutes ago. I heard everything." Behind him, Jeremiah's whimpers grew weaker, more desperate. I noticed the warden's hand gripping something metal behind the door, keeping it out of my view. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Peterson appeared around the corner, coffee cup in hand, his usual morning routine. He stopped when he saw me pressed against the restricted door. "What's happening down here?" My heart raced. This was my chance to expose everything, to get help. But then I remembered Peterson's daughter went to school with the warden's surviving kids. The whole prison community was interconnected in ways that made every decision complicated. I forced my voice steady and told Peterson there was a situation, but I had it handled. He needed to go back upstairs. He hesitated, looking between me and the door, but eventually shrugged and headed back the way he came. Jeremiah Jeremiah's moans grew weaker behind the door. If I didn't act soon, he might not survive whatever the warden was doing to him. The door opened slightly. The warden's face appeared in the gap, splattered with blood, his eyes wild, but somehow also calculating. He spoke calmly, which was somehow worse than the screaming. "You can join me, or you can leave. But if you leave, you were never here." 3 realizations hit me simultaneously. My keycard records showed I was in this restricted area when I shouldn't be. The security cameras that normally monitored every inch of the prison were mysteriously off in this corridor. And in the warden's visible hand, he held a bloodied pair of pliers. Self-preservation kicked in. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking. The warden watched me retreat, then added, "Check the morning schedule. You're assigned to help me with a special project in an hour." The implication was clear. He'd planned for potential witnesses. I stumbled back to the break room, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold the coffee cup steady. Hot liquid spilled over my fingers, but I barely felt it. Around me, other guards chatted about their weekends, and I heard Daniels mention how the warden seemed better today, more focused. They had no idea what was happening 50 feet below their feet. My phone buzzed, a text from my wife asking if I was okay, worried because I'd missed dinner again. She mentioned my phone had died for the 3rd time this month, and I really needed to get a new one. Normal life continuing while horror unfolded in the basement. I pulled up the personnel files on the break room computer, needing to know more about Jeremiah. His record showed 15 years for armed robbery, multiple infractions inside including 3 fights, and suspected contraband smuggling. The other guards already didn't trust him. The warden had chosen his victim carefully, someone who wouldn't be missed or believed. The main door buzzed, and the head of the prison board walked in unexpectedly. My stomach dropped, but he just smiled and shook hands with the day shift supervisor, praising the warden's handling of recent discipline issues. He mentioned doing a routine inspection of the facilities. I watched him walk past the entrance to the restricted area, completely unaware that torture was happening just 50 feet below. The prison chaplain appeared at the warden's office door, holding papers that needed signing for the memorial service. The warden would have to come up, would have to play the grieving father in public while Jeremiah bled in the basement. The thought made me sick. My hands started trembling again, worse than before. The sounds from the basement had triggered something deep, bringing back memories from my deployment. Collins noticed and put a hand on my shoulder, saying I looked rough. "Just like when you came back from Afghanistan," he said. "This whole thing with the warden's daughter has everyone messed up." My phone buzzed with a notification. The warden had created a new WhatsApp group for all guards titled Safety Updates. But as I watched guards getting added and their read receipts appearing, I realized what this really was. He was tracking who was active, who was responding, who was staying neutral versus supporting him. I tried to head back downstairs to check on Jeremiah, but found new security protocols had been implemented overnight. My keycard no longer worked for that area. When I asked about it, the desk sergeant just shrugged and said the warden had implemented needed changes after the tragedy. Everyone supported him. Who would question a grieving father's desire for increased security? Throughout the day, I watched the warden work the room during shift change. His grief had earned him a special kind of power. The administrative staff now informally checked with him before approving any guard requests. When I tried to adjust my schedule, the secretary asked if I'd run it by the warden first. He'd built a soft power structure through tragedy. By evening, I could barely function. I hadn't slept, haunted by the sounds from the basement. During shift change briefing, I stumbled over my words, mixing up assignments. The arriving guards exchanged glances, probably thinking I'd been drinking. My partner, Thompson, pulled me aside after the briefing. We'd worked together 5 years, covered for each other countless times, but now his face was hard. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "Either report him or transfer out, but I won't lose my job over your conscience." That night, the local news ran a puff piece about the warden's strength through tragedy. The reporter interviewed him at his daughter's favorite playground, talking about how the prison community had rallied around him. The comments section filled with supportive messages from guards' families. My own mother shared the article on Facebook, praising that poor man's resilience. The next morning, I learned Jeremiah had been moved to medical isolation on Sewerslide watch. Only the warden, medical staff, and specifically assigned guards could see him. The bandages on his hands and the bruises on his arms were hidden from general view. Rodriguez found me during lunch break. We'd been friends since training. Our kids played together. He looked uncomfortable as he admitted his son had applied for the criminal justice program at State College. He needed the warden's recommendation letter. The unspoken message was clear. Don't make him choose between friendship and his son's future. I realized then how trapped I was. To prove Jeremiah had been tortured rather than attempting Sewerslide would mean revealing I'd been in a restricted area without authorization. Every move I might make had been anticipated. At 2 a.m., I headed to the bathroom and found the warden at the sink, washing blood from his uniform. He looked up when I entered, smiled that cold smile, and said simply, "Jeremiah had another episode." We stood there, understanding passing between us. He knew that I knew. I knew that he would destroy me if I talked. This was no longer about justice or truth. This had become a chess match, and I was already 3 moves behind. The warden's psychological warfare began in earnest the following week. I discovered he'd started attending the same grief support group as my widowed sister sister-in-law, Sarah. She mentioned it casually during Sunday dinner, how this kind man who'd lost his daughter had been texting her supportive Bible verses. My blood ran cold when she showed me the messages. He was quoting her late husband's favorite passages, information he could only have gotten from personnel files. My wife noticed my distress that night. I tried explaining about the torture, about what I'd witnessed in the basement. She frowned, confusion crossing her face. She said I'd told her something different yesterday, that I'd heard rumors, not seen anything directly. We both realized the stress was affecting my memory, making me an unreliable witness, even to my own family. The next morning brought another blow. While searching for leverage, I found my own past incident reports in the filing system. 3 years ago, I'd written a commendation praising the warden's firm but fair discipline methods after he'd handled a prisoner riot. My own words, my own signature, documenting support for his harsh treatment of inmates. He'd kept copies, of course. My son came home from school that afternoon with tears in his eyes. The warden's surviving 8-year-old had told him during recess that his daddy said my daddy was sick and might hurt people. The psychological war had reached our children. I watched my boy's confused face as I tried to explain that sometimes adults disagree about important things. I pulled the break room security footage from the night I discovered the torture. The camera showed me entering the restricted area, my timestamp clear, but the angle didn't capture the corridor leading to the torture room, a standard blind spot every guard knew about. The footage proved I was where I shouldn't have been, but showed nothing of what I'd witnessed. The prison psychologist called me in for a mandatory evaluation. She noted my exhaustion and trauma response following the child's murder, suggesting I take medical leave. Her report would document my paranoid fixation on the warden. Another chess piece moved against me. Late one night, I remembered watching the warden type his computer password during happier times. I tried variations of his daughter's name at an unattended terminal, hoping to find evidence. The system locked me out after 3 attempts, and I knew IT would report the failed access attempts by morning. Studying the shift logs, I noticed a pattern. The warden's special projects in the basement aligned perfectly with his daughter's favorite TV show schedule, 7 to 8 p.m. He was torturing Jeremiah during the time he used to spend watching cartoons with her. The prison counselor pulled me aside after our mandated session. Policy required her to report any concerning statements about colleagues to administration. My accusations against the warden would be documented as potential signs of psychological instability. I attempted to record the warden at his daughter's memorial service, hoping grief might make him confess something. He spotted my phone immediately, stopping mid-eulogy. His voice carried across the silent congregation as he asked if I was still trying to make this about myself. Every head turned to stare at me. I pocketed the phone, my face burning. The shift change protocols meant I had to leave each day without confirming if Jeremiah was still alive. The uncertainty crushed me. Was he recovering? Was the torture continuing? The not knowing became its own form of torture. My union representative met with me in the parking lot, away from prison cameras. He listened to my story, then shook his head. Even if it was true, he explained, no one would believe a grieving father had become a monster. He had his own family to protect, his own job to consider, another ally lost. I began noticing small things. The warden now wore his daughter's Minnie Mouse watch, sitting at her favorite spot in the cafeteria during lunch. Other guards saw it as a touching tribute to his lost child. They didn't see the calculated performance I was witnessing. He approached me privately with an offer, a transfer to day shift with a raise, if I would focus on healing and moving forward. The words were carefully chosen: accept the bribe or face the consequences. I refused, trying to maintain some integrity. My assignments immediately became the worst possible. Night shifts in the most dangerous wings, paired with rookie guards who couldn't provide backup. Thompson formally requested a new partner. I was being systematically isolated. While reviewing security footage for any evidence, I made a discovery. Another prisoner, Marcus, appeared in the corridor just 5 minutes before the daughter was found. But Marcus had been on the lockdown list that day, a list controlled by the warden. He'd never been interviewed because officially he couldn't have been there. The warden and I both realized something crucial. His daughter's iPad, still in the evidence locker, might contain photos or videos from that day, but it was passcode protected, and only she had known the code. We were both thinking the same thing. What secrets did that device hold? My attempted proof crumbled when the prison doctor explained Jeremiah's injuries to investigators. The wounds were consistent with his documented history of self-harm from previous facilities. The medical records supported the Sewerslide watch story. Every avenue I pursued had been anticipated and blocked. My mother called that evening, her voice strained. She attended the same church grief support group as the warden's mother, Gloria. She was torn between believing her son and abandoning a friend in her deepest pain. I could hear the choice in her voice before she made it. She would support both families, but couldn't provide money for any legal battle I might pursue. Desperation drove me to adopt the warden's own tactics. I started fabricating prisoner complaints, hoping to trigger an external investigation. I wrote reports about concerning sounds from restricted areas, backdating them to seem legitimate. I was becoming what I'd sworn to fight against. I orchestrated an accidental encounter with a state inspector at a gas station. While buying coffee, I casually mentioned the unusual injury patterns I'd been seeing among inmates. I planted seeds of doubt, watching them take root in the inspector's expression. The warden had taught me well. Sometimes the indirect approach worked better than direct accusations. Before the warden realized what I was doing, I screenshotted the employee complaint system. Multiple guards had reported concerning sounds from restricted areas over the past weeks. Their reports had been marked as reviewed and resolved by the warden himself, evidence of a pattern. Finally, the daughter's teacher reached out to me privately. She revealed the child had seemed anxious about visiting the prison, though excited about the promised ice cream afterward. Normal childhood nervousness, nothing that suggested what would happen, but it added another layer to the tragedy. My investigation consumed everything. I missed my son's school play while staking out the prison, trying to document the warden's movements. My wife texted me a photo of the empty seat beside her. The disappointment in her message was clear without words. Legal consultation drained our savings. The lawyer explained how difficult it would be to prove anything without Jeremiah's testimony. Meanwhile, the warden received paid administrative leave for grief counseling. The system protected its own. Everything exploded at the memorial playground dedication. Surrounded by grieving families, I couldn't contain myself anymore. I accused the warden publicly, my words spilling out in a desperate rush. Children cried. Parents pulled their families away. The scene became chaos, traumatizing the very people we were supposed to be honoring. The suspension came immediately, without pay, pending psychological evaluation. The evaluation was scheduled with Dr. Harrison, the warden's golf buddy. Another move in the chess game, another piece positioned against me. I moved into my brother's basement, my marriage hanging by a thread. The warden, meanwhile, received casseroles and sympathy from the community. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. My wife's ultimatum came during one of my brief visits home. Either get proof or get help, but stop destroying our family for a maybe. The pain in her eyes was worse than any physical torture. Our family was becoming collateral damage in my pursuit of justice. My investigation caused an innocent janitor, Martinez, to be suspended. The cleaning logs showed him near the torture room during the times I'd identified. He hadn't done anything wrong, just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. His daughter asked why Daddy couldn't buy her school supplies anymore. Martinez's wife confronted me at the grocery store. Her words cut deep. I was as bad as the warden, destroying families for my obsession. I wanted to explain, to make her understand, but how could I? She was right. I was causing harm to innocent people. I continued anyway. The greater good, I told myself. Exposing torture mattered more than one family's temporary hardship, but the justification felt hollow as I watched Martinez's family struggle. Williams, the last guard who'd shown me any support, asked a question that shook my moral certainty. What if Jeremiah had culled her? What if he deserved what was happening? I couldn't immediately refute the logic, and that terrified me more than anything. During therapy, I made an admission that haunted me. Early in my career, I'd ignored prisoner abuse, looking the other way when a colleague got too rough. The pattern was clear. I'd always been a coward when it mattered most. Reviewing shift logs for my defense, I discovered something damning. I'd been assigned to a different wing entirely that day. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that corridor. By following the sounds of torture, I'd violated protocol. The daughter had broken rules by wandering, and I'd broken them by investigating. The prison board scheduled an emergency review of the warden's conduct, but it was set for tomorrow, giving him a full night to destroy evidence. My lawyer was in another state, handling a family emergency. The timing felt orchestrated. In a private moment, the warden revealed his true motivation. He didn't care if Jeremiah was actually guilty. Someone had to pay for his failure to protect his daughter. Jeremiah's criminal record made him unsympathetic, the perfect victim for his rage. It wasn't about justice. It was about needing someone to blame. The deeper truth emerged slowly. The warden's own sister had been culled by a predator when they were children. The killer was never caught. The cycle of violence had started decades ago, trauma breeding trauma across generations. I made a choice that called the honest guard in me. Using a sample of the daughter's blood from evidence, I marked some of the torture tools in the basement. I planted evidence to ensure the investigation would find something. Every principle I'd held sacred died in that moment. I became calculating, manipulative. I bribed a commissary worker to report that Jeremiah had made fearful comments about the room downstairs. I created a paper trail that hadn't existed before. The warden had turned me into a mirror of himself. When the review board finally expressed concerns about the warden's conduct, the victory felt hollow. I saw him at his daughter's grave that evening, sobbing uncontrollably. We were both broken men, destroyed by the same tragedy in different ways. The warden's counterstrike was brilliant. He claimed I had a persecution complex and hero fantasy, that I was trying to insert myself into his family's tragedy. The board found his psychological evaluation of me compelling. After all, what grieving father would have time for torture while planning his daughter's funeral? Everything hinged on Jeremiah testifying, but weeks of torture had destroyed him psychologically. He flinched when anyone approached, couldn't form coherent sentences. The star witness was useless, broken beyond repair. The warden's son approached me at school pickup. I'd helped him with homework years ago, and he still had my old police badge sticker on his backpack. His question was simple and devastating. Why are are you trying to hurt my daddy?" I had no answer that a child could understand. The guards split into factions. Some understood grief could drive a man to extremes. Others were horrified by the torture allegations. The prison became a battlefield of whispers and sidelong glances. The board's preliminary finding was predictable. Grief explains, but doesn't excuse. They wouldn't pursue criminal charges without Jeremiah's testimony. Psychological torture was too hard to prove, too easy to explain away as the fantasies of a traumatized man. I called in my last favor. An old military buddy now worked in prison oversight. He owed me. I'd saved his life in Kandahar. He promised an independent investigation, a fresh set of eyes on the situation. But even favors have limits. He could only go through standard channels. The investigation would take months, following proper procedures. No special treatment, no expedited timeline. My last hope dissolved into bureaucracy. The investigation revealed something unexpected through the daughter's teacher. She'd kept detailed behavioral notes, documenting how the child had become increasingly withdrawn after her grandfather's death 6 months earlier. The entries showed a pattern, the daughter asking if people stay sad forever when someone dies, if daddy would ever smile again. The teacher had filed a mandatory report the week before the murder, but it sat unprocessed in the backlog of social services paperwork. That final evidence changed everything. The teacher's documentation proved the daughter had been living in fear, watching her father's grief consume him. She'd stayed silent to protect his reputation, choosing him over her own safety. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She'd died protecting him from himself. I made my decision then. Despite knowing it would destroy the warden's remaining family, I committed to exposing the truth. The planted evidence I'd created would ensure the investigation found something, even if Jeremiah couldn't testify. My transformation into someone willing to manipulate evidence for the greater good was complete. The warden's therapy notes became crucial when they were subpoenaed. His grief counselor's records showed he'd described detailed interrogation fantasies during sessions, talking about making prisoners confess to crimes. The therapist had documented concerns about therapeutic privilege, unsure if the fantasies constituted real threats. The warden had unknowingly created evidence against himself. I presented everything to the board without emotion, maintaining complete professional demeanor. The screenshots of employee complaints, the teacher's documentation, the therapy notes, all laid out in chronological order. Across the table, the warden watched me work, and I saw the moment he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. His chess game had failed because he'd underestimated how far I'd go. The pattern of abuse became undeniable as more guards found courage to come forward. They described witnessing the warden's escalating behavior, the threats against their jobs if they reported anything. Each testimony added weight to the investigation. The prison's culture of silence finally cracked. Both sides prepared final evidence packages, while the board announced their decision would come through written review rather than dramatic hearings. No courtroom theatrics, just administrative process grinding toward conclusion. The anticlimax felt appropriate somehow. Bureaucracy resolving what violence had created. Review day arrived with the entire prison on edge. Guards gathered in the parking lot, families sitting together regardless of which side their husbands had chosen. Some wives brought coffee and sandwiches, turning the vigil into an impromptu community gathering. The divide between supporters and accusers blurred as everyone waited for answers. The physical toll showed on both of us. The warden had lost 30 pounds, his hands trembling constantly. I wasn't much better. The stress had aged me years and months. We passed each other in the hallway that morning, two broken men destroyed by the same tragedy, neither speaking. The truth emerged through the board's written finding. They documented how grief had transformed into madness, madness into torture, torture into institutional failure. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but the conclusion was clear. The system had failed at every level, from the warden down to guards like me, who'd initially stayed silent. The prison chaplain's statement proved decisive. He'd provided written testimony that during a prayer session, the warden had confessed to going too far with Jeremiah. The chaplain struggled with breaking confidentiality, but ultimately decided he couldn't lie, even for a grieving father. His moral courage highlighted my own earlier cowardice. The board ordered 3 things: criminal investigation into the warden's actions, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, and federal review of the entire prison system. The administrative language couldn't hide the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. Decades of overlooked abuse had finally reached a tipping point. My hidden phone recording was authenticated despite its poor quality. Audio experts confirmed Jeremiah's screams, and the warden's voice were identifiable. The recording wouldn't be admissible in criminal court due to consent laws, but for employment action, it provided irrefutable evidence. Technology had captured what human witnesses had been too afraid to report. The evidence proved torture, while simultaneously revealing the warden's complete psychological break after his daughter's murder. The psychiatric evaluation showed he genuinely believed Jeremiah was guilty, despite no evidence. His delusion was absolute. He'd convinced himself torture would produce truth. The human mind's capacity for self-deception had enabled atrocity. The warden's breakdown during his final interview was complete. He ranted about Jeremiah, about his daughter, about the conspiracy of guards protecting a child killer. Even faced Faced with evidence of Jeremiah's innocence, he couldn't accept it. His grief had created an alternate reality where torture was justice. When offered the chance to speak at the administrative hearing, I faced a choice between vengeance and mercy. Part of me wanted maximum punishment, wanted him to suffer as Jeremiah had suffered, but Sarah's memory stopped me. She wouldn't want more violence born from violence. I advocated for psychiatric treatment rather than maximum prison time. The warden needed help, not just punishment. My recommendation focused on removing him from any position of power while ensuring he received mental health treatment. The board seemed surprised by my restraint. The final determination came down. The warden was removed from his position, permanently banned from correctional work, and ordered to a psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. Criminal charges would be filed, but the focus would be on rehabilitation rather than pure punishment. It felt like the best outcome possible from an impossible situation. The prison community split between those calling me courageous and those branding me a rat who'd betrayed a grieving father. Death threats arrived at my brother's house. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. My family's safety became a constant concern, making relocation necessary. We found a small apartment 3 towns over. My wife had stayed despite everything, though our marriage bore deep scars. Trust, once broken, heals slowly. We attended counseling, working through the trauma that had infected our entire family. Some days were better than others. Finding work proved challenging. My resume showed 20 years in corrections, but the scandal followed me. Applications went unanswered. Finally, a hardware store hired me for inventory management. The pay was half what I'd made as a guard, but it was honest work without moral compromise. Sleep remained elusive. At 3 a.m., I'd wake to phantom sounds of screaming. Therapy helped, but some wounds don't fully heal. The therapist said trauma response was normal after what I'd witnessed and done. Healing would take time I wasn't sure I had. Jeremiah was released early due to false imprisonment. The years of his sentence served during and after torture were vacated. He disappeared immediately upon release. No forwarding address, no contact information. I hoped he found peace somewhere, though I doubted it was possible. The warden's surviving children entered intensive therapy. Reports filtered through mutual acquaintances about their struggles. The 8-year-old who'd told my son I was sick now battled his own demons. Another generation marked by trauma, the cycle continuing despite our efforts to break it. Federal monitoring transformed the prison. New oversight protocols, mandatory reporting systems, independent review boards, all implemented to prevent future abuse. The guards who'd stayed silent faced retraining or termination. The culture of complicity slowly dissolved under external pressure. Martinez was reinstated with back pay after the investigation cleared him. His wife never spoke to me again, but I heard his daughter got her school supplies. Small victories in an ocean of damage. At least one innocent family had been made whole. The daughter's murder remained unsolved. Marcus, the prisoner who'd been in the corridor, was questioned extensively, but no evidence linked him to the crime. The iPad never yielded its secrets. Sometimes there are no answers, no closure, just absence where a child should be. Justice came through institutional channels rather than dramatic confrontation. The warden received treatment while being held accountable. Jeremiah gained freedom, but not healing. The system changed incrementally. I kept my integrity, but lost my career and community. Looking at the final tally, everyone lost something. The warden lost his daughter, then his sanity, then his freedom. Jeremiah lost years and his psychological health. Martinez temporarily lost his livelihood. My family lost stability and community. The other guards lost their comfortable silence. But from those losses came necessary change. A corrupt system faced scrutiny. Abuse was exposed and addressed. Future prisoners might be safer because we'd finally broken the silence. It wasn't the justice anyone wanted, but it was what we achieved. My son asked me once if I regretted getting involved. I told him the truth. I regretted not acting sooner. That first day, when I heard the screams and knocked on the door, I'd chosen protocol over instinct. If I'd forced my way in, called for backup immediately, maybe Jeremiah would have suffered less. The hardware store job became routine. Stock shelves, check inventory, help customers find what they need. Simple tasks without moral complexity. My coworkers didn't know my history, and I didn't share it. Sometimes anonymity is its own form of freedom. My wife and I rebuilt slowly. Trust grew through small acts, showing up, keeping promises, choosing transparency over secrecy. We'd never be who we were before, but maybe we were becoming something stronger. Trauma had tested us, and we'd survived, scarred, but intact. The story ended not with triumph, but with ordinary life resuming after extraordinary horror. Justice was partial, healing incomplete, consequences ongoing. The warden got treatment, Jeremiah got freedom, the prison got reform, and I got a second chance at being the man I should have been from the start. In the end, that had to be enough.